years from now, when everybody in this room has passed on, we're not going to be able to pass our guns on to our kids. So what this is generational gun control right here. Again, they're going to let us keep them if we, quote, register them, but they're going to get them within one generation. So this is why this has got to be opposed. In addition to the 157, any semi-automatic rifle that can accept a detachable magazine that has one of the following features, it's going to be banned. Pistol grips, forward gripping stock, telescoping stock on the M4s, all those things, gone. Can't have them anymore. They're going to grandfather them in, but only if you register them. And if you register them, when you pass away, you're going to be heading them over to the federal government. Semi-automatic pistols that can accept detachable magazines that have one of the following: threaded barrel, second pistol grip up front, magazine that mounts anywhere other than the grip. Semi-automatic rifles and handguns that accept more than 10 rounds, out. So those are going to be gone. Semi-automatic shotguns that have certain features also. So you can see how broadly they're defining these things. Next slide. It even goes as far as to say if you've got parts or certain combinations of parts that can be put together to kind of make or repair a rifle, those things are banned. So like how many people carry like spare firing pins around, keep them in the basement? Those things, you can't have them anymore. They're going to basically stop us from being able to even fix the guns that we have. And then finally, any ammunition device that holds 10 or more rounds, which is a lot of stuff. And then unlike the assault weapons ban that we had back in the 90s, that had a 10-year sunset provision, this one's forever, no sunset. So if this thing should get in, we'll never get rid of it. Next slide. Obama came out with about 23 executive orders early last week, and we're not going to go through all of them. But here are some of the key things here. The key thing is, on the face of it, some of these things appear very innocuous, but the devil is always in the details of what they're going to do when they enact these programs. The first one, improve, quote, incentives for states to share information. Well, we know what happened when the federal government provided incentives for highway funds. It basically became crack cocaine to the states. Our states now are indebted to the federal government and dependent on those monies. So here again, the federal government is going to create incentives to basically give money to states that would be tough to pull back from. We don't want anything to do with this. Here's a great one. The Attorney General, Eric Holder, who gave us Fast and Furious, is going to get to review categories of individuals prohibited for having guns who are considered dangerous. He's number one on the list. He actually provided and allowed guns to go south of the border that were used to actually kill dozens of people, including a Border Patrol agent. That's who we're going to be letting actually determine who amongst us here are, quote, dangerous beyond the people who shouldn't normally have guns. It's ludicrous. Launch a national safe and responsible gun ownership campaign. Guess what? Maybe if it was in the Reagan administration, maybe. But what does that mean? You know what they're going to do? They're going to tax you to have money to brainwash the kids against firearms. That's what that is. It's not going to be about safe guns. It's going to be about anti-gun and putting that message out there. 16, clarify that the Affordable Care Act does not prohibit doctors from asking patients about guns in their homes. We don't need that kind of snooping. It's not their business. And then finally, launch a national dialogue by Kathleen Sebelius on mental health. So again, some of these things seem innocuous, but it's all what's going to happen when they go out to do it. What it appears is not what it's going to be, and it never is. Next slide. The UN Small Arms Treaty, this thing floats around all the time. Fortunately, the Senate's always been able to defeat it. But again, the focus on it, again, when you read the documents, is on criminal organizations and militias. But when they go to implement it, let's see how far they expand that. What it covers, the transfers and imports and exports of firearms around the world. Okay, transfers is in there. Basically, two big things. They want records keeping. So again, it kind of fits into Obama's plan on registration. It's the last thing we need. The federal government doesn't need to know what people own. If they sign this treaty, it becomes law of the land, and suddenly we're going to have a national gun registry in this country, through a UN treaty. Those records have to be organized so national people can come in and take a look at it. And then the beauty of the last thing is actually develop and implement an effective disarmament, demob, and reintegration programs for small arms and light weapons. So again, on the face of this is real good. Yeah, there may be bad militias over in other countries doing it. But once this gets pulled in, this will get expanded to include us. The federal government has no control on itself. It'll be used against us at some point in the future. Next slide. This is the last slide. The good news is, even though there was those three threats, there's one good thing out there helping us right now in the state of Pennsylvania. And that's Darrell Metcalf's bill 357, aptly numbered. Basically, it's going to be introduced. It's got some good co-sponsors around here. But what it's going to do is a couple things. It's going to prohibit any federal registration restriction of privately owned firearms, magazines, and ammunition in this Commonwealth, which is a great thing. Our people at the state level standing up to the Fed saying, this is not your business, go away. It's also going to require, should something get passed through, for the state of Pennsylvania, the Attorney General, and everybody to actually intercede and stop the federal government from actually coming and implementing these things here. So not only are we not going to recognize it, our officials are going to basically stand between the feds and us. Powerful. And the last thing is anyone, including federal agents, who should happen to come in and try to do this in our Commonwealth will be considered felons and arrested. This is powerful. This is what we need. Again, we're law-abiding citizens. We are not the problem. Our state now is willing to stand up to protect us. So this bill really needs to have a lot of support. So those are the legislative background, and with that, I'll turn it over to Steve.
Well said, Jim. We reached out to Representative Metcalf last Wednesday when he announced House Bill 357, and he was unable to meet with us tonight, but he said he would be more than happy to come to one of our future meetings. We then reached out to a co-sponsor here in Bucks County, Paul Clymer over in Percy, and he too, and he called me back, and we spent 15 minutes on the phone. He's behind us 100%. In fact, he belongs to Paletown Rod and Gun Club up in Quakertown. So he's behind us, he understands it, he's a co-sponsor of the bill. If there's something that you could do tonight, and this is really a proactive thing, there are some petitions over here that we just got fresh today. It was published today by Metcalf's office to sign that to support House Bill 357. So they're over on the side table over there. Our next speaker, Dave Sager, is quiet-spoken gentleman, but a powerfully spoken gentleman. He's going to talk to us about the Second Amendment. Dave?
Good evening. The Second Amendment, let's just read it, and I'm sure that most of you know this by heart. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay, right now this is the law of the land, and there's kind of two distinct thoughts in here. One that focuses on militia, and the other that focuses on the right of the people. So let's take a look at why it was written this way and what does it mean. Next slide. Okay. The Constitution was ratified in 1789, and the Bill of Rights was ratified in 1791. Now picture these folks from the states going down to Philadelphia to the Constitutional Convention. Most of these states already had conventions of their constitutions of their own, so they took them with them. That was going to be the basis for the U.S. Constitution. So here's a couple that focused on individual rights. First, from the great state of Pennsylvania, as it was written in 1776, the right of the citizens to bear arms in defense of themselves and the state shall not be infringed. New Hampshire, different words, same meaning. All persons have a right to keep and bear arms in defense of themselves, their families, their property, and the state. Next slide. All right, now there were a couple states that, more than a couple, that decided to focus on militia. And here's a couple here. Maryland Constitution, that a well-regulated militia is the proper and natural defense of a free government. And similarly in Virginia, that a well-regulated militia comprised of the body of the people trained in arms is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free people. So you can see how this came together. They took the militia part from the states, and then they took the individual right part from the states, and they combined them. Next slide. This begs the question, what is a militia? What did it mean to the Founding Fathers? We can't go back and ask them, but we can certainly see what they wrote. George Mason, I ask, sir, what is a militia? It is the whole people, except for a few politicians. And from Virginia, Richard Henley Lee. A militia, when properly formed, are in fact the people themselves and include all men capable of bearing arms. Now let's take this a little bit further and look at what some of the other founding fathers had to say. George Washington, a free people ought to be armed. Here's a couple quotes from Thomas Jefferson. The strongest reason for the people to retain the right to keep and bear arms is, at a last resort, to protect themselves against tyranny in government. And again, Thomas Jefferson, no free man shall ever be debarred from the use of guns. Okay, we're going to do one more quote, but there's a point here to be made. Whenever these folks went to Philadelphia, they argued a lot about a lot of things whenever they were putting together the Constitution. They did not argue about the Second Amendment. There was virtual agreement. Now here's a quote from Sam Adams that I think kind of sums it up. The Constitution shall never be construed to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms. Powerful stuff. Next slide. Okay, so what is the meaning of the Second Amendment? It's not about hunting. It's not about shooting competition. It's not about killing deer. Thank you, Governor Cuomo. It's about defense of self, family, property, the ability for citizens to get together to form a militia to defend the state, and this one is most critical, establish an armed citizenry that would discourage a tyrannical government. Next slide. Okay, so the Founding Fathers were God-fearing people. They understood evil. They understood the nature of man. They knew that man, when there are no checks and balances, he's prone to corruption and he's prone to abusing power. So with that in mind, they constructed the U.S. Constitution. And we can see it play out in today's newspaper. Separation of powers of state between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. We see that all the time occurring. Balance between the federal and the state governments, okay? And then balance between the federal government and the people. And this most critically comes through in the Bill of Rights. It comes through in the election booth. But you have the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, part of the Ninth, and part of the 10th. Clearly, part of the balance of power. Next slide. All right. So, if the Second Amendment is about balance of power and protecting against a tyrannical government, what exactly is balance of power when you talk about weaponry? Well, in Christ's time, it was a sword. At the time of the American Revolution, it was a flintlock. Today, it's the AR-15 and a Glock with as many bullets as it can hold. Whenever you erode this, whenever you erode the Second Amendment, it's the first step towards tyranny. We can't let that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Excellent. We're going to pass a plate around. This is like church in a sense, to help defray the cost for the hall rental and the AV equipment rental, things like that. So if you're so moved, please feel free to drop $1 or $2 in the bucket. Our next speaker has has lived on both coasts of the country, from New York City to California. Carlo Gruletto is, at this point, very active in our organization, and he has been termed our philosopher. So, Carlo, would you come up, please, and just share some of your thoughts with the group?
Okay, I'm going to keep this short. Actually, when I set this up, I thought you could probably write a book on this. But one of the sounding themes that I've always had is those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, from the 20th century Spanish philosopher George Santayana. I saw you. Next one. Okay. The repetitive path that goes over and over again. You register, you disallow, you confiscate. Let's look at some of the totalitarian regimes under the pretense of public safety, what has happened. In Turkey, you have 1 to 1.5 million people murdered, mostly the Armenians. This is World War I. The USSR, 20 million murdered. Mao China, 30 to 45 million murdered. Nazi Germany, 20 million murdered. Cambodia, 2 million murdered. In all of these cases, the thing that started out, you register, they know who you have, they confiscate your guns, and you're not able to defend yourselves. The results of all of this is genocide. Okay. According to an organization, the Jews for the Preservation of Firearm Ownership, 170 million people are killed at the hands of their own government in the 20th century. And that's not counting wars. It's exterminations, elimination of undesirables, etc. The basic formula again, firearm registration, firearm confiscation, and a helpless people. Democratic regimes. There's another slide there that there should have been about about Native American. Is that in there? Okay. Then okay. Yeah, go back. It's out of sequence. It follows better this way. Yeah, you just had it. Yeah, okay. We talked about totalitarian regimes, but let's not forget this. In the 19th century, thousands of Native Americans were killed by the U.S. government. They essentially were not allowed to have any significant arms. What happened is they bought some illegally. They got them from traders, et cetera, et cetera. And then when Native Americans were able to procure repeating rifles, basically Henrys and Spencers at the time, the Battle of Bighorn occurred, and you know what happened there. If you can go back one slide, okay. The democratic regimes, again, not only totalitarian, but the democratic regimes, again, under the public pretense of safety. The utopian model. After a mass shooting by a madman, violent crimes are allegedly reduced by confiscating the registered guns. The UK, first handguns, then rifles, and now you need to show a need to get permission, even buy a simple shotgun. I have a friend of mine that was competing for the Olympic team in the UK. Basically, he owns a single-shot Anschutz 22 caliber match rifle. He needs a special permit to have it. It has to be kept in a safe, and periodically they can come at their will to come in his house and inspect the safe to make sure the gun's locked up. Okay, in Australia, the same scenario. And now you can't even own a pump shotgun. Okay. The results of this, homicide rate in England and Wales, 52% higher since the 1968 gun control law. 15% higher since the 1997 handgun ban. This is an interesting one. Australia, people in the press always quote, oh, well, why can't we be like Australia, blah, 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 blah. Okay, fine. Australia, after the gun